once I was abused, it sort of messed me up. It messed up my theology. It messed up the way I perceived guys. I dated the wrong people. And so it just set me on a bad path. It put me at odds with God or with the church until I met David Prince.
We're going to spend some time talking with Nancy French, 5-time New York Times best-selling author, individual who has written this book called Ghosted, An American Story. It came out just about a week ago. It is published by our friends at Zondervan. I think you will appreciate that. She has ghost-written for many prominent individuals and also has been an investigative journalist looking into spiritual and even sexual abuse at a Christian camp. So a lot to cover here. And Nancy, welcome to Point of View.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's, if we can, maybe start with your original story. You talk about the fact that your home was actually built on the New Madrid geological fault, one of the most active faults in the center part of the United States. But while we're talking about anti-Semitism, grew up around coal mines and guns, but also rednecks and even some individuals that were distant relatives that were part of the KKK.
Even as you were saying that, it just dawned on me right now at 49 years old that I say New Madrid instead of Madrid, because I grew up, in Paris, Tennessee, which is not as exciting as the Paris, France, and, near all of these little towns that are named after their European counterparts. And just now I realized I mispronounced that. Anyway, yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, I grew up in rural Tennessee, and my family of origin is from Monteagle Mountain. And, yeah, I grew up in like a lot of people did, but maybe a little bit more dramatic with some of the circumstances that started, my life on this earth. So it started me in a pretty dramatic path, and that dramatic path has kept going.
Well, and again, I will warn people that you have had quite a number of very traumatic incidents in your life. And, of course, there's that old famous quote that says, to know people well is to know their tragedy. And, when we're talking about individuals threatening you, putting their hands around your neck, people dying, all sorts of other issues, of course, all sorts of threats that happened more recently. I just want people to recognize that you could look at your picture, a picture of what you look like, and the picture which I think other people have seen, especially if they've seen your book that is out in print, and say, well, she must have just come from this idyllic life and an easy life, and yet that first chapter is just full of what you call rough and ready and hard scrabble kind of activity that you came from.
Right. The first 4 chapters are pretty intense, probably with a lot of material that you probably wouldn't expect coming from me. But I should say, Kerby, that I love my author picture. I'm looking great in it, but since I wrote the book, I've been diagnosed with cancer. I'm as bald as an eagle.
I know. I've seen that picture.
I know. Yeah. So the drama of my life has not abated since I stopped writing the book. But the good news is that God's in control of all of it.
Let's get to the point that maybe has really been a defining part of your life, and that is Vacation Bible School. That should be something that would be very positive, but yet I think now that has been something that has affected your life all the way up to where you are today, hasn't it?
Right. I was the type of person who grew up going to church 3 times a week, loved church, loved Vacation Bible School, loved the little cookies that you put on your pinkies that you could eat around and make a ring out of. I loved the whole thing. But when I was 12, my Vacation Bible School teacher, who was about 10 years older than me, who was also a preacher, he, sexually abused me, and that put me on a bad path because it sort of took me out of my little nest, my spiritual nest, where my church was a safe place, and it made church feel unsafe because it was unsafe, and it sort of messed with my relationship with God, as you might imagine.
Well, again, we've talked about this before on the program. We might have had various individuals that have been sexually abused. We've talked about domestic abuse, verbal abuse, and sexual abuse, and the rest. but it does, I think, illustrate the fact that once you've either come from a home where you are treated poorly or where you have had some kind of abuse, it affects the way in which you perceive yourself, the way you perceive other men. We'll talk a little bit later about how David maybe helped heal some of that. But speak to that issue for just a minute, because that was one of those things early on in your book that I thought was maybe a life lesson that we can pass on to others, that even though you may have been a victim of abuse, whatever that might be, that doesn't have to mark you for the rest of your life if indeed you are willing to address that. But sometimes it's difficult because up until recently, a lot of people would just simply want to turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, it's really hard, man. It's because, if you're a victim of childhood sexual abuse, it takes decades to sort of come to terms with that. I think the average age of coming out on that issue is close to 50 if you were abused as a kid. So it's very difficult. So you've got a lot of decades between your abuse and when you can start to heal. If you follow those statistics, where you might make a lot of bad decisions. But yes, and that's what happened to me. I'm not speaking for other people, but like once I was abused, it sort of messed me up. It messed up my theology. It messed up the way I perceived guys. I dated the wrong people. And so it just set me on a bad path. It put me at odds with God or with the church. And until I met David French. So I met him when I was in college, and he talked to me about God in a way that was fresh and new, in a way that I could hear, if that makes sense. He was really helpful. He used C.S. Lewis to talk to me about the existence of God and whether or not I believed in God. He used the Lord lunatic or liar sort of setup to talk to me about that. And when he talked to me about that, even though I was wearing black fingernail polish and smoking clove cigarettes, and I thought I was, an atheist, when he asked me if I thought Jesus was the Lord lunatic or liar, I could not say that he was anything but the Lord.
But before that, of course, one of your chapters talks about, I wanted a guy to change my life, someone to swoop in and be different enough from me to pull me from the quicksand and take things in a different direction. And then the next two chapters really kind of tell the stories of some of those, if you will, I guess we could call them poor choices. But as we left you were talking about the fact that David was able to speak to you and really put in front of you this idea of the trilemma, Lord, liar, or lunatic, which is really based upon C.S. Lewis's argument, and certainly one that actually resonated with you.
Oh, yes. Thank you for the word trilemma. I could not retrieve that from my data bank in my head. But yes, I met David. He had just graduated from law school, and I was at a Christian college here in Nashville, and we met on the sidewalk. And we just really hit it off, and we had a lot of interesting conversations, namely because, and I talk about this in the book, but most people don't know this, and if you don't know my husband, David French, he currently writes for the New York Times. He's a wonderful guy. You should read him. But back in the day when we met, he was just a young attorney who just moved to town and here in Nashville, and we hit it off. But regrettably, he was very sick. He was diagnosed with an incurable disease and was dying essentially from chronic ulcerative colitis. He was about to have his colon removed when I met him, and pretty much. And so we had a very short-lived dating experience because all of our conversations were serious, and we weren't talking. We were pretty frivolous and silly, but there were a lot of grave things happening around us, and so we got engaged very quickly after meeting each other, and we were married within 3 months, and that was 28 years ago. So it's a great story now, but it caused a lot of heartache amongst our friends and family, as you might imagine.
Well, I wanted to talk about that because I remember you even writing a piece about this, because I wouldn't recommend normally that if you have very significant reservations expressed by your family and you only have known a person for a few months, that you would go off and marry that individual. But of course, I guess I remember reading about going to Bill Gothard and some of those other things. But it does seem to me that at the time, the arguments were pretty much against you marrying David French, and yet I think it turned out pretty well, didn't it?
And this is just my story. This is not like the way to live or the way to date or the way to whatever. It worked out for us, and it's been wonderful, and he's the best husband ever.
But again, he got healthy. And then you have an individual that's a Harvard Law grad. He's working with fire, and he's also going to the military. So talk about his life for just a minute, because his life then affects your life. How's that come together?
Right. And, when you say he got healthy, that is exactly true. And it's a miracle because his friends at the Harvard Law School Christian Fellowship prayed for him for hours. And a miracle happened. He was cured of his incurable disease. And that was, back in like 1995. And he has been healthy ever since, and I'm very thankful for that. But after he regained his health, thanks be to God, we moved to, we got married in France. We moved to New York. We had sort of like this chaotic, crazy life because I was from a small town in Tennessee, and I just wanted to do things that sounded fancy, things that sounded sophisticated. So when he proposed, I thought, hey, we should get married in Paris, because that was the most romantic place I'd ever thought of. I'd never been to Paris, France, obviously. And then when he proposed, I said, yeah, I'll marry you, but let's live in Manhattan and have a view of the Empire State Building. And that was only because that was the only building I knew that was in New York. It wasn't like I was... So I was just trying to sound fancy because it sounded like the type of thing like a Harvard Law grad would expect in a future wife, and I was sort of trying to become this person that I wasn't. But, he sort of faked me out a bit, too. When you only date for 5 minutes, you can, pretend to be what you are. But over the past 28 years, we've gotten to know each other. But he's a wonderful guy. He took his Harvard education. He used his constitutional knowledge to defend the rights of Christians on college campuses, and just in many different ways. And then after 9/11, he actually joined the Army and was deployed to the Diyala province in Iraq and earned a Bronze Star. And since then, he's worked for various publications, but he currently is a columnist for the New York Times, one of their conservative columnists. And I'm just very proud of the guy.
But again, what was happening is, as you said, kind of whirlwind. I mean, first of all, David's healing, then a French wedding. And as you said at one point, I didn't really expect this would be my actual life. Then he gets a teaching position at Cornell Law School. And now you're in Ithaca, New York, in which you are dealing with an annual snowfall of 70 inches a year and all sorts of other things. So just, all over the map. But over time, let's get back to your story a little bit. In terms of you joining Alliance Defending Freedom, you begin to think about using your writing skills, because all that comes together and gave you a chance to meet Mitt Romney and his wife, and actually writing a number of what ended up being best-selling books.
Right, yes. So I do not like to brag about my credentials, but I am a 3-time college dropout. And David likes to say that I am very ambitious and I may drop out of more colleges before this is all said and done. However, I never really knew what to do with my life. And after I stayed home with the kids and sent them off to kindergarten, I decided to start writing. Eventually, through a crazy set of events, I end up writing, being on the campaign bus with the Romneys back in 07, 08. And I wrote a book for Ann that never saw the light of day because Romney wasn't the GOP nominee. But that led to the Palins reaching out, and I literally lived with Sarah Palin in Alaska and their family, and I probably did 3 Palin books and worked with Bristol Palin, Sarah and Todd's daughter, and that was a New York Times bestseller. So once I had that under my belt, this college dropout started getting attention from other GOP people who needed books. And so that's how I got into it. It's like one of those things. It's like you can't really follow the path of this, to be successful. Like, okay, the first thing you do is drop out of 3 colleges. The second thing you do is, it doesn't quite make sense, but my life has just meandered around, and it afforded me all these really interesting opportunities.
Privileged to have with us Nancy French as we talk about her book, Ghosted. And I thought I'd start with something positive, but it'll back us into the negative, and that is the issue of adoption. Recently, we have been promoting the conference that was just held called Chosen, which was really promoting Christians to get involved in adoption and foster care. And that brings us to your own desire in terms of international adoption. So I wanted to talk about the positive aspect of that, but that led very quickly to some attacks that came against you and your husband, right?
Right, yes. We had 2 biological children together, and after David's deployment to Iraq, we decided to adopt. And we enlarged our family with our 3rd daughter named Naomi that way, and she's a huge blessing to our family. What I didn't anticipate is the transracial angst that would culturally develop and become more and more acute as the years went on. Like you sort of think of adoption and you think of getting this beautiful baby and everyone being excited about it. But there's a lot of political undertones about adoption that I was not completely aware of. And then, in more recent years, with the rise of white nationalism, because Naomi is Black, she's been targeted, our family's been targeted in ways that I did not anticipate.
Yes, and again, referred to as the little Ethiopian and some of those kinds of things. And so that all of a sudden puts you into this whole idea of the alt-right. And David at one point asked you, do you know Steve Bannon? And you said, well, yeah, I remember how he took his bagels, because I guess you had actually served breakfast to him, the Palin household. Well, that led to all the questions about the alt-right and Breitbart and a number of other issues. And so very quickly, some of these topics which, and even individuals that you knew, you began to find yourself on the receiving end of a fair amount of negative publicity. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, that's a fair way to put it. And it was funny because my husband opposed, or both David and I opposed Trump in 2016, which is when all of the angst started, because we used to be like very popular amongst Republicans. David even won the CPAC Ronald Reagan Award in 2012. And then once he made that decision, because David said that he was too conservative to support Donald Trump, we became about as popular as head lice in the party. But the attacks were not rhetorical. The attacks were more like sexualized and racialized.
Right.
So they didn't talk to us about the various topics. Like, it's a very legitimate conversation to talk about the various political issues that, were surrounding these presidential races. But what happened was people instead just wanted to eviscerate us and make us miserable. And so they made fun of my sexual abuse. They made fun of our adoption. They made fun of Naomi with language that I couldn't even really say. When I read the audiobook, I didn't even want to say it. It was so bad. So we've been through a lot. But of course, the adoption journey was totally worth it. And we don't regret, taking the stances that we've made, but we just didn't anticipate how much it would cost.
Let me in just a minute talk about his decision and then the non-decision to run for the presidency. But let me take some phone calls along the way. So in the state of Texas, Byron, thank you for calling today. What would you like to share?
Thank you so much, Kerby. First of all, I'd like to say I'm so happy that you're still on the air. I was driving out here on Route 66 in Adrian, Texas, which is the middle of nowhere, on a farm to market road. I went to turn off the radio so I could return a phone call, and it didn't turn off. It switched to this program. And when I came into the program, she was saying that it's about age 50 on average when people finally come to terms with their sexual abuse. And I thought, oh my God, I'm supposed to be listening to this. Because a week ago, I confided in a friend that I was so frustrated and I felt like a failure because I still wrestle at times with things that happened to me when I was 10. And I brought up my abuse when I was 30 because my marriage was falling apart, and I was in counseling, and my parents drove to a major metropolitan city where I was living to meet with the counselor, and I told them what had happened, and I quote, my father said, "If it happened, it was your fault, because if you told me, I would have done something about it." And then my mother said, "I always wondered what changed about you. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to ask." And now I'm still wrestling at times with those demons that I cannot seem to put to rest. And just hearing her say that, I was like, oh God, I am not just crazy. I'm not abnormal. This is...
And Byron, I might just say we do talk about that quite often, and we have booklets that we've done on domestic abuse, sexual abuse. I certainly would encourage you to find a Christian counselor that can maybe bring out some of the other feelings and concerns you have. And Nancy, I'll let you jump in because you've been down this road as well. Maybe you can give some advice.
Yes, I'm sorry. I feel emotional hearing that, Byron. I'm also high as a kite on cancer drugs right now, but as Kerby has said in this interview, I've been investigating sex abuse at Kanakuk camps in Missouri, and a lot of those kids are just now getting to the point where they're talking about it. So there's hundreds of victims, and I've just for the past few years been neck deep in this. And I think one of the blessings or the benefits of my book is sort of talking about what happens when you're abused and how the church, like, I'm sorry the way that your parents responded, that's so difficult, but the church responds wrongly, so like the church responds, not just individually, but it responds wrongly collectively. So like in the instance of the Kanakuk camps thing, which I did 8 articles, ended up front page of USA Today, proved the stuff I wanted to prove. And then I thought the church would have this collective outrage because we are the people who care about family values and children and sexual purity, marriage vows. And the church just had this collective yawn. They did not want to know it. And the hard lesson that I learned, and it is very difficult to learn, I'm still not over it, I will never be over it until the day I die, is that they believe that like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Clinton can be a rapist. And to be clear, I believe that both of those men are. But they will not go against someone who is purportedly in their tribe, like Donald Trump, who's been held liable in court for the for rape. Or if there's somebody at their Christian camp that they really like, he's magnanimous, or he brings a lot of people into the Bible study, then they're willing to overlook it. I don't know how to deal with that. And so maybe other people have answers, but I've wrangled with it for years because I thought I belonged to a tribe of people, Christian people who cared about certain values. But when it all came down to it, I revealed all of the sex abuse, and no one really paid that much attention, which is shocking, especially when you have all kinds of politicos talking about various pedophile-related conspiracy theories that have not been proven, yet my investigation was completely proven.
Again, when you talk about that, we've had everybody from Mary DeMuth to June Hunt and a variety of others talking about the issue of sexual abuse. I'll use Mary DeMuth because she's a good friend and has been here on the program, pointing out that the same sort of things have happened when you talk about the Catholic Church, or let's pick a Protestant denomination, the Southern Baptist Convention. And there is a tendency sometimes, and it is not one that I endorse at all, but I'm at least trying to explain. These individuals say, well, if we bring this out, then the institution itself will be harmed. Well, the institution has already been harmed by the actions those individuals took. And first of all, for Byron, let me just say for you, I hope that you will find a listening ear, an individual that provides some counseling, some direction for you individually. But after we come back from the break, Nancy, let's talk a little bit about, I guess we'll skip over some of the other parts of your book, what we can and should do, because it does seem to me that as just the other day, Bill Maher was saying, here we're having people now telling us what happened in Nickelodeon. And he says, it's the old, why do I rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, why do pedophiles end up in places like camps, Boy Scouts, Disney, all sorts of other places like that? Well, that's because that's where the children are. And it's a cautionary tale that you tell. And I just mentioned Bill Maher in passing. He said, I don't have kids. I don't even like kids. But why is it I'm always bringing these up? And he was talking about Nickelodeon and Disney and Boy Scouts, of course, added camps and a variety of others. And not to mention just all the very prominent people. And so, Nancy, let's go to an email you received a number of years ago from Gretchen Carlson. Now, many of us will remember her as an individual that was on Fox News, who then later sued Roger Ailes, the founder of Fox, for sexual harassment, and she contacted you. And there have been so many examples that have come out. Many of them have been from news media, from Hollywood and other places about this. So as you point out, there should be more of a collective outrage. But if anything, we're recognizing how deep and pervasive this issue of sexual abuse really is in America. Your thoughts?
Yes, I think the most important thing that I'm taking away from it is not how pervasive it is in America, because we expect there to be difficult things in this world, but how pervasive it is in the church and how people who go to church do not care about that. So I think we can all collectively get together and say that the Catholics have a really bad problem. What we can't get together around the potluck table and say is that the Baptists really need to get some stuff together. And that is what has been going on. So I've approved all this stuff at these Christian camps, this Kennecott camps in Missouri, and you have all kinds of denominations that feed into this camp, and they still feed into this camp. There's not been a collective outrage. So I do have a lot of concern for the sex abuse that exists in all of these secular organizations. But even more so, I feel like the church should be a place, a safe haven, where this should not be tolerated. And if it happens, then you should respond well to it, which is respond at all.
And it does seem to me that I do want to try to figure out what we can do going forward, because my wife will tell you I probably speak at lots of Christian camps, probably speak more at pregnancy resource centers than anywhere else, but certainly a close second would be I speak in all sorts of camps. I've been on the board of one of camps, and that is Pine Cove, and that has always been a concern as a board member or as an individual who has participated in those camps. You're bringing in individuals. You hope that you know something about them. You do some kind of background check. But I've come to realize how deceptive pedophiles can be, how deceptive sexually abusive people can be. And then you bring in all sorts of summer campers and also counselors who you've met on a campus. Maybe you've done some background check. And there's just so much of a potential for a problem. So after looking at this story, and you have a whole section on your website, you can go to nancyfrench.com and see all your different articles on this investigative journalism. Can you give some advice to individuals who are pastors or camp leaders or individuals that sit on the board of Christian organizations? Because it does seem to me that we certainly need to have a collective outrage after the fact, but what can we do so it doesn't happen in the future?
Well, that's a very good question, but I just want to just push back a little bit on the narrative. So, like the way that you describe it, it seems like there's this sexual abuse, like this pedophilia fog that comes down and you can't do anything to escape it. That is not the narrative that happened at Kennecott camps. They were aware of all this abusive stuff for 10 years, and they let the guy keep going. So it's not like you have to have a Ouija board or some sort of witchcraft to figure out what's actually happening in this fog of war. That is not the case. There were people who were literally reporting this person for his abusive behavior, witnessed it, and they ignored it. And the same people who were oversaw that abuse are still in charge of the camp today. So it's a totally different narrative than something that's just happening that you can't quite, figure out how to maneuver. But maneuvering it is very important. So, you mentioned background checks. You mentioned, like just being aware, like taking people seriously. Not, there's just a million things that you can do. For example, not having an internal alarm system. So, like if someone at a camp is abused, you don't have them write it down on a piece of paper and drop it in a wooden box where possibly their abuser gets it out and reads it. Call the cops. There's just a lot of very common sense stuff. But I'm not even at the common sense stuff. I'm at the most basic white and black response to children being abused. Like you physically stop it. And that's the narrative that was happening in this Missouri thing, let alone the Baptists, which I haven't even had a chance to really dig into because that was such a massive violation of trust with their congregants and with all of these victims. So it's not even like difficult. Like I would like to have a conversation, the PhD level conversation about how to prevent sexual abuse. I'm at the kindergarten preschool level where we can say, okay, pedophilia is bad. When someone is reported to be a pedophile, we call the cops. That right there would have eliminated 97% of the stuff that happened at Kanakuk.
Yeah, and again, when you were talking about that, what I see is time and time again, because that seems to have happened in Southern Baptist Convention. I'll just, again, trust people like Mary DeMuth and others that have researched it to say they knew this, so they sent this individual to another church. As I understand from the camp, I'll take you from this particular camp to another particular camp because it's a multi-camp setting. And the situation where you just keep passing it on is one. The other thing I want to pass on to pastors is you will hear the story and the natural reaction is, oh, well, that person's an elder, or that person, I've known that person for years. I don't think that can't possibly be. Your reaction will determine whether it goes any further, because then that person might just close up for the next couple of years. You have a duty to report, and you have a duty to take seriously those kinds of comments, don't you?
Yes, you just have you should listen to the people who are telling you that they're being abused. And so like it's very difficult, like Byron the caller from Texas said, it's very difficult to say that you're being abused. But there are instances like we were talking about with the Baptist and with the Kanakuk where people were saying, hey, I'm being abused. Hey, this person is participating in nude behavior with children. And they were just yawned. They were like, oh, this person is too important to us. This person brings in money, this whatever, and there are multiple people, but it's just having that outrage and okay, we're not going to let this happen under our watch. Just having that posture would be so amazing and refreshing.
Well, again, that's one of the two final chapters in your book. But if you go to your website, nancyfrench.com, scroll to the bottom, you'll see some of those articles. And again, I call this a cautionary tale. Make sure that these kinds of things don't happen in your church, your denomination, your Christian camp, whatever it might be. And just a call for us, again, to speak truth and to always address these very difficult issues, which we've talked about here on Point of View. So, Nancy, I appreciate you writing the book, and I know in the midst of what you're going through right now in cancer treatment, it was a very significant challenge to give me an hour, so I appreciate that you did that as well.
Kerby, thank you so much. We laughed, we cried. This was something else. Thank you so much.
One last time, the book is entitled Ghosted. It just came out. Nancy French wrote it. It is published by Zondervan. You should be able to find it in a local bookstore. But if you want to learn more about her or the book, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you, again, have appreciated all that we've talked about today. And don't forget that if you would like more information about what we're talking about, you can find it at the website, pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.